Okay, so today I want to try something a little bit different. I was inspired by a conversation that I had with my friend yesterday to show a different dimension of my personality. Because one of the things that I do when I'm making videos is I'm kind of like in presentation mode. I have an idea or something that I'm trying to bring through, and I kind of organize it in my head and then create the prerequisites to build whatever concept or idea or experience I'm trying to bring through. And then I bring it through in like an orderly fashion as like a, presentation. And I've known and kind of felt for a long time that while that's necessary to a certain degree, and it brings through good information, it doesn't really show me in the way that I normally am. Like, the experience that you get from watching one of these presentations is a much different experience than you get from actually being with me or hanging out with me. And that was, like I said, that's something I've kind of known for a long time. I hadn't really figured out how to bring across that more natural, experience of myself. And I have a friend that yesterday mentioned that to me, and she was telling me how she wishes that I could be more like how I am when we're hanging out in my videos. And so that inspired me to make this video. And this video so as a result, this video has no purpose. I mean, it has a purpose. The purpose is what I'm telling you, to be more natural. But it doesn't have a agenda. I don't have a particular idea that I'm trying to bring across here. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to simulate what it would be like in a normal conversation with people, or like when I'm just hanging out with you, more what I'm like. The tricky thing about that is that, when I'm just hanging out and talking to people, there's this ping back that goes on. And a lot of what I say or how I interact has to do with the energy of the co-creation. And so as a result, it's really fluid, or it's very pertinent to what's going on with the person, or it's just relevant because it's kind of like a co-creative experience. But when I'm talking to a camera, it's not really like that. It's like, it's kind of like, I don't have the other person's energy and in the collective field to prompt my comments or my inspirations. So I'm kind of like, this is why I try to create like an idea beforehand and bring through an idea beforehand. So I'm here now talking to the camera, doing my best to just kind of like be myself or be how I am in a normal setting. Which, this actually makes me think, because the idea about the co-creative process when you're engaged with people or a group of people is something I've thought about a lot, because it brings out a really interesting idea, which has been my experience and an interesting way of observing the co-creative process, especially when there's somebody that's presenting information. Because when there's someone presenting information, or there's some sort of, this even works with like a jam band musician, or anybody that's doing a somewhat improvisational co-creative kind of experience. So when I say presenting information, I don't mean how I meant it prior, where it was really organized and predetermined. But I mean more of like in an intuitive, free-flowing kind of presentation, where people are, where whoever it is that is the speaker, whether that's one person or several people, is really kind of intuitively improvising based off of the energy in the field and just what comes up in that moment. But what that creates is and this is the idea I was talking about, this creates this kind of channel. And the way I see it is that somebody that's truly improvising is kind of like a channel for the collective energy there. So they're like, there's a collective mind or a collective energy field there, and that person basically becomes the voice for everybody. And somebody that's really good at doing that becomes an amazing voice that speaks to the particularities of the unspoken energy field and consciousness, and therefore becomes highly resonant to whoever they're speaking for or speaking to. Now, a great example of this is in, I always use the Grateful Dead as an example of this, because the Grateful Dead is this jam band that is so good, or has been so good. I mean, they're different people than they were originally now, but so good at channeling the collective. So it creates this like hive mind experience where everybody's there. A lot of people are on LSD, pretty much all of them, and there's this this psychic, telepathic thing going on where the jam band is basically being the channel or the spokesperson for the collective, and then they use the music as kind of like carrier waves to transmit like a greater experience or a greater expression of like a higher form of intelligence or a higher form of consciousness that can only be expressed by bringing the entire group together. And this is like, you know, it's like synergy, right? So you take two different pieces that say are worth 5 points each. So this person's worth 5 points and this person's worth 5 points. Not in like a value judgment kind of way, but just say that they're each worth 5. But when you put them together, they create 25 instead of 10, because there's this synergistic experience that happens when you bring people together in a benevolent and co-creative way. And so I see this happening in this kind of like channeling experience with things like jam bands or things like intuitive speakers or people that are, just speaking for the crowd. Now, a really interesting actually interpretation of this is that of Adolf Hitler, right? So Adolf Hitler was really, really good at channeling the collective shadow of the people that he was speaking to, the collective unconscious of people. And that's why the German people got so fired up when they were listening to him speak, because what he realized was that he had this knack for being able to, when he got up in front of the people, kind of channel where their pent-up anger or where their judgment was, and really speak to that and be a voice for that anger and judgment. So what it did was, a lot of these things, maybe as individuals, the German people didn't really conceive of the fact that they might have had these prejudices or these angers or these different capacities within themselves. But when he brought a crystallized expression of that to the people, and it spoke to their like shadow tendencies, it fired them up. And so this is a way that actually that same kind of co-creative channeling can be done in a way that speaks to the shadow. Not to say that that there wasn't a certain level of victimization, in a sense, going on with the German people, and not to say that Hitler was innocent, that he was just a spokesperson for the collective, but he obviously had his major shadow issues going on too. But anyway, it's just kind of an interesting concept. So that brings me to back to what I was saying originally when I came here, which is the idea that when I'm just speaking to a camera, there's not really a collective to tune into. I mean, there's a collective to tune into, but there's not people present in the field. And so I guess it's a lot more subtle of a tune-in. Like, I would have to tune in more deeply to maybe like a particularized demographic of who I wanted to speak to. And maybe by tuning into that, then I can be more of an intuitive channel and speak more directly to the people without having to pre-conceptualize or pre-organize the topics that I'm trying to speak to people about. Because what happens is the information will come to me as like, this is really relevant, and I'll be like, okay, I really feel like I should explain this. And in that moment of bringing it through, or when it's coming to me, is probably the best moment for me to share it. Because when I get those hits when I'm around other people, it comes through really quickly, and it's and it comes through actually more elegantly and more articulately when it's improvised or when it's spontaneous in the moment. because that's the original kind of seed of it, and I can just, it like pours out of me. It actually comes in forms where I'll see these kind of visual representations so there'll be like really quick visuals, but there'll be like a complex visualization that I'm basically decoding when I speak. And the only way to really do that spontaneously and in the flow is when it's coming in that moment. Otherwise, what I have to do is I have to kind of ground that into a conceptualized idea and then put all the labels and terminology around it, and then try to remember all those pieces and then recapitulate those pieces into a presentation, which is honestly a lot more difficult because it's not natural, it's not free-flowing, it's kind of like it's premeditated. Whereas when I'm getting the inspiration in the moment, like I've actually been getting the inspiration in the moment with what I've been saying right now, and so it's been coming out in a pretty clear way. When I get that inspiration in the moment, it's I actually do a better job of describing it, and then there's something greater that's organizing the structure and the sequence of what I'm giving, so that it actually comes across in a more potent way or more digestible way. In other words, I don't have to overthink it, in a sense. But that spontaneity isn't always on command. So it's like, well, I have this great idea and I want to bottle it somehow. So then I make the video, by bottling the idea and kind of putting it in sequence. But anyway, so this was the experiment that I'm doing today, which is like, let's see if I can bring something down kind of more in the moment. And it seems like the moral or the lesson or whatever I'm learning here is that if I can open myself up to more spontaneity, maybe just turn the camera on and try just speaking naturally to it like I'm doing it right now, then maybe I'll be able to bring some stuff through that is brought through in more of a digestible and with more integrity, honestly, because it's coming through naturally in that moment. It's not me remembering or regurgitating like a download that I had before. It's like streaming. So instead of downloading and then representing, it's more of like a streaming experience. And it's funny because intellectually I know this, and actually experientially I know this too, because there's so much magic that happens in the improvisational space. I host an improv class. I host an improv experience at my house every other week, because the magic of improv is really being able to tune into that streaming consciousness and then become a vessel for, if your intention is to do this, a vessel for the greater good of the group or the collective that you're around in the moment. So it's funny because I recognize the value in this, and I see the value in intuitive sharing, and that's actually pretty common amongst my community of people, that really valuing that intuitive spontaneity and not kind of pre-planning too much. And so, that was the exploration today on the camera. So I don't even know how much. That's about 14 minutes. So that's pretty good. It's probably a good video. So it was cool, to bring through that concept of being the channel for the collective, and then and so I guess like what it's coming back to is valuing the spontaneity and putting yourself in an open enough space, right? So when I've tried to do this before, I guess I wasn't really I guess I wasn't comfortable enough on the camera. So there was like this anxiety of needing to say something the right way or like have an agenda so that I knew what was going to happen. And, over the course of the last year, I haven't really tried this in a long time. Over the course of the last year, I've gotten a lot more comfortable on camera. And so, I guess it worked a little bit better this time. So I think that this is, there are some things that I'm probably just going to have to present, because that's like the only way to bring it out. Maybe I'll be able to spontaneously pull it through, but if there's something I feel is pertinent that I've already kind of got the download and I want to recapitulate, I'll have that presentation format. But I'm going to work towards doing more of this kind of like popcorn style, like just coming off the top and letting it come through naturally and intuitively. And see, that's the downside of not pre-planning. the battery ran out. See, there's a place for planning. See, there's a place for it. And also the other thing I noticed is I didn't put the light on. So the light's probably all dark in this video. Maybe I'll just adjust it in post-production and try to get it brighter. But yeah, so hopefully this can start off a new form of video making, because honestly, it was a lot easier to just kind of sit down and see what came out than it was to pre-plan it. But anyway, so let me know what you think. I think this might be a new cool way of doing things. So yeah, this is Patrick Haize. Thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I will talk to you next time. One love.